All right, everybody, welcome to our webinar today on Biochar Project Finance. What's available today and where do we want to go? We have a very exciting panel discussion in store for you today. I will be your moderator. My name is Hannah Calloway. I am the Education Manager with the International Biochar Initiative, affectionately known as the IBI. We're so glad that you're here to this webinar that we've built in collaboration between IBI and Kita. So IBI is the global network for all things biochar. We provide a platform for fostering stakeholder collaboration, good industry practices, and environmental and ethical standards to support biochar systems that are safe and economically viable. So simply put, IBI is here to help scale the biochar industry. Kita is the carbon insurance specialist, bridging the insurance and carbon markets to offer a bespoke portfolio of carbon insurance products that act as a stamp of confidence and safeguard against loss. And thank you so much to the folks at Kita for partnering with us to put this webinar on, for making it possible today. And thank you to everyone in the audience that registered and is joining us to help us move the biochar industry forward. So here's a list of some of the topics that we'll cover today. This is not comprehensive, it's not exhaustive, it may be a bit redundant as it's all interconnected, but we will be talking a bit about challenges to biochar project finance, current opportunities and gaps. So what are emerging opportunities? What's kind of missing in the space? We'll discuss some considerations for capital stack and financial modeling, assessing project viability and risk, and we'll discuss investment trends, of course, and so much more, as you all in the audience will have also the opportunity to ask your own questions of the panelists in a little bit here. So this is what our agenda looks like. Right now, we're in this welcome and introduction to content moment. So for the next 5 or 10 minutes, I will be kind of setting the scene, laying the foundation, and then I will invite our panelists to come on camera in just a few minutes and introduce themselves. I know you're all eager to hear from them, and we'll dive into the discussion. Now, you all will notice that you are not on camera and you're muted, but you do, however, have a series of ways that you can interface with Zoom. I see a lot of us already in the chat. That's great. The chat is open for all of you to offer your reflections, comments, ideas that might be coming to mind. Whereas the Q&A, which you'll notice on your Zoom screen, is another feature. It's usually right next to the chat. The Q&A is where you can enter your own questions for the panelists during the discussion later on. So I, as the moderator, will pull from that Q&A in addition to some of the questions we've already come up with to pose to the panelists. So again, chat is great for comments and reflections. Q&A is where you want to put your questions for the panelists, and then we will launch 1 or 2 pop-up multiple choice polls throughout the program as well. So some of you are already doing so, but I wanted to point out that in the chat, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves. It's so exciting to see that we have people from all over the world: Texas, Pakistan, Nigeria, Switzerland, Portugal, to name just the last few that I saw. So I invite you all, let us know who you are, what's your name, where are you, and perhaps what brought you here to this webinar today. And this little bit that I skipped to note on the Q&A feature, something really neat, is if you notice that someone asked a question that you also want to hear asked of the panelists, you can actually upvote that question. All right. It's great seeing you all enter in your information to the chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome to each of you. Hello, Tejas. So I know we're all excited to hear from our panelists, and we will introduce them in just a few minutes. These are the folks that you will be hearing from today. Not pictured is Lauren Baritsky-Smith. She is our communications lead with IBI, and she is the magician behind the scenes running tech for us. So thank you so much, Lauren. You will see her popping into the chat. She'll share some resources on behalf of IBI where you can expand your learning and get connected with the global biochar community. So keep an eye out for Lauren in the chat. So Again, in a few minutes, we will introduce these panelists, all of whom carry a wealth of experience and knowledge from different backgrounds in the carbon finance space. And speaking of varying backgrounds, we'd love to know where you all are coming from in terms of your work in biochar in the audience today. So Lauren is going to launch a poll for us in just a moment. And you can go ahead and interact with this poll. Let us know which identity best fits your relationship to biochar today. Perhaps you're a producer, you're maybe a buyer, are you working for a nonprofit with the government? And I recognize we can't all be fit into a single biochar box, right? You probably are occupying multiple roles, but choose the one that kind of best describes you today. And we see these results coming in. It looks like we've got so far, majority biochar producers, at about 48% of you are producers. And we also have some consultants. We have some students. That's great. We love to see it. Excellent. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, I'm going to give you all 5 more seconds to answer the poll to decide which identity in your world of biochar you'll choose today. Great. All right, we have some technology providers. Excellent. All right, thank you all so much. It's great to know who is here with us. I'll share those results so you all can get a sense as well. All right, so moving on to kind of setting the scene. Now, I recognize that the vast majority of you are coming to this webinar with extensive biochar knowledge. This is a very niche webinar, and probably you all are very, very familiar already with biochar. However, some of you may be new, right? There may be investors in the scene that are just starting to scope out, what is this biochar industry? What exactly are biochar projects? So I thought it would be great to just give a little bit of a brief introduction. So what is biochar at the very high level? So biochar is a material that is produced when biomass is heated at very high temperatures in an oxygen-limited environment, okay? So like a kiln, for example. So biochar is usually produced from organic waste. That's the biomass feedstock, right? And this organic waste, for example, might be agricultural or forestry residues, right? So for example, in agriculture, all of the bits of the plant that don't go to market, right? The corn cob will go to market, and then what do we do with the husks? When those are heated in an oxygen-limited environment, such as a kiln, it undergoes pyrolysis, a type of thermochemical conversion that essentially just transforms that biomass into biochar. And in that process, all of the carbon that that plant held through photosynthesis, that it drew down from the atmosphere to grow its leaves, all of the carbon that that biomass, that plant held, gets locked in as biochar, right? That can be put back into the ground when applied to soil, or be mixed with concrete, for example, which has a wealth of its own benefits for infrastructure that we won't go into here today. So biochar retains that durable carbon from the biomass. And as a final note for this high-level introduction, we can see from this kind of up-close microscopic photo of biochar all of the little holes, right? Biochar is highly porous. So it retains water and nutrients when applied to the soil. We often hear the analogy of biochar as like a condominium, right? So it really encourages microbial growth by retaining that water and nutrients and giving a place for those microbes to thrive, leading to stronger crop yields and more carbon sequestration from the atmosphere. So that gives us kind of a foundation, which we may or may not have needed, because as we can see, biochar is clearly gaining traction. It's gaining a lot of popularity at the global scale. So this data shows us the rise of biochar, global biochar production from 2021 to 2023. So we're looking at 2021 at around 96,000 metric tons produced versus 2023, over 350,000 produced. That's a 91% compound annual growth rate between 2021 and 2022. Now, why is biochar as an industry growing so much and so fast? So some of the key drivers that we're seeing that are reported in terms of biochar growth from industry stakeholders is growing awareness about biochar, reflective of this huge audience that we have here today. Demand for carbon credits, I'm sure we're really excited to get into that a bit in the panelist discussion. Increased agricultural demand, and the list goes on. So those are some of the big drivers. And I want to note that this data that I've just shared in the last 2 slides comes from the Global Biochar Market Report that was conducted and published between IBI and the USBI based on 2023 survey data. And Lauren has just entered into the chat a link to download that report for free. I highly recommend. There's a lot of really interesting and insightful information in there. So the next few bits of data that I'm going to share with you also come from that report. So let's talk economics, right? That's what we're all here for today. We're thinking about finance. So we're excited to have learned from this report, from this survey data, that the global biochar market soared to over $600 million in 2023, right? So we're seeing this as really setting the stage for future growth. Now, this reported revenue comes from biochar producers, distributors, value-added producers, and equipment manufacturers. And these are the numbers broken down by industry member and by year 2021 to 2023. And in the bottom right of this table here, we can see that total revenue generated or reported for 2023 at over $610 million. Very exciting stuff, absolutely. And these numbers, this industry revenue actually calculates to a compound annual growth rate of 97% between 2021 and 2023. And the report also gave us the insight that the projected revenue for 2025 is around $3 billion. Right, so we are excited about the biochar industry. The biochar industry is excited about itself. It's reporting its profits. It's reporting its projections. And so with that, that kind of led us to do a webinar on Biochar Project Finance. But why is this webinar so important if the numbers are growing, right? So we also know from this report that one of the key inhibitors to growth of the biochar industry is limited access to capital, right? And so we're digging into how can we bridge those gaps? How can we increase access to capital? Why is there limited access to capital, right? How can we address that? The key educational need that our stakeholders reported in terms of need in the biochar industry was the need for financial aspects of biochar and education for financial aspects of biochar. That led us to this webinar and also incorporating this type of education into the many sort of education offerings that IBI is continuing to develop and release that you can tune into if you become a member or subscribe to our newsletter to stay tuned to, online and in-person offerings such as this one. And then I also want to note from the report that some of the two kind of key manufacturing challenges that industry stakeholders are reporting is around capital for customer financing and capital to expand production, right? So by hosting webinars like this, by creating this panel, really what we're trying to do is work to connect projects with finance education and also connect the financial world, connect investors with education around biochar projects, different business models for biochar, et cetera, right? We're trying to close that growth gap through education by bridging the community and sharing information. And this is just to note, data from 2023 from CDR.FYI reported that biochar CDR technology received only 12% of the total CDR technology funding in 2023. So my final 2 points before we introduce the panelists, who I know we're so excited to hear from. Again, I've just got 2 more slides of just kind of level setting. So as we progress through this conversation, I just invite everyone to keep in mind that, of course, biochar business models can vary significantly, right? So as one example that I'm putting here for us to think about is that there's a large and ever-growing variety of production system types, right? And that's going to both inform and be informed by your business and financial models. There's a lot of different factors that will go into making that decision, and it will inform the direction that your business takes. So as we discuss Biochar Project Finance, just keep in mind that, as one example, there's a variety of production system types and a variety of opportunities for modeling around it. And this pie chart is reflective of the different production system types that we're seeing at play in the global industry, again, according to the market report that you can get for free on our website or by scrolling up to where Lauren linked it into the chat. My final point, just to offer some insight into really common revenue streams. And again, these are just some common ones. This is not an exhaustive list, but some common revenue streams of a biochar production business include CDR credits, right? The carbon dioxide removal credits, energy. This is, the potential to produce electricity, heat, fuels, or chemicals from pyrolysis gases. The physical biochar product, and this is one of the more challenging revenue streams to generate, in part because, it's not fully a product until value is added, such as by charging the biochar. And then finally, I'll note feedstock tipping fees. This is essentially where a business, one can get paid to take unwanted feedstock, unwanted organic waste off of somebody else's hands, which then it will be used to go produce your biochar. So for example, a wastewater treatment plant will often pay landfills to take their biosolids off their hands, and that's a feedstock tipping fee. So with that, the moment we've all been waiting for, I'll ask our panelists to go ahead and come off camera, the big curtain reveal, and I will invite each of them to go ahead and introduce themselves. So I'll ask each of you, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, by the way. I'll ask each of you to share with us your name, a bit about your background, and what role your company plays when it comes to Biochar Project Finance. And we can go in the order that we see on the screen here. So I'll hand it first to you, James. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. No, thanks, Hannah, and to the IBI team, Lauren and Wendy Liu. I think it's been great everything you guys do. And I also loved your intro, Hannah, because finance is such a dull subject, but it was a real great scene setting, which was perfect. And I also hadn't heard of biochar as a condominium, so that was a new one for me. I like that one. That makes complete sense. So, hi everyone. My name is James Kench, head of insurance at Kita. My background: law, finance, and insurance, as you'd expect. So all very boring. But I've always focused on emerging markets, emerging risks. Most recently looked at renewable battery storage project financing. Now trying to bring that to the carbon space. And then at Kita, our mission is to de-risk high-quality carbon projects and enable them to scale. And we think insurance is one of the keys to unlock that financing, because without insurance, it's hard to get the financing. Insurance obviously helps when there's something goes wrong. We're a backstop to that, but it can also act as a sort of upfront extra layer of due diligence, act of a stamp of quality, and also provides an investment grade credit rating to improve some of the counterparty risks. And just quickly how we do that in Kita, we look at particularly delivery risk and some of the counterparty risks. So delivery risk for buyers of pre-purchase credits or investors who are streaming credits into the future. So the risk that they don't receive what they expect to get. We're also looking at providing non-payment insurance for banks, for lenders, and for developers. We're just building a political risk product around Article 6 and some of the corresponding adjustment risks for trading those credits internationally, and also looking at the delivery risk for developers, which will be coming soon as well. But great to be here, but I'll hand over there.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, James. Great to meet you all. Jan Cihlar, I'm a VP Climate Finance at PYREG. My background actually is in renewable energy financing. I switched to biochar in about a year ago because it was the next cool thing to really pay my attention to. At PYREG, we manufacture what I would call the state-of-the-art biochar production machines. The first plant went operational already in 2013, so we've been on the market for quite a while. Today, we have deployed more than 60 machines worldwide, and we just keep growing. What we did notice, and that's why I'm really excited about this webinar, is a lack of project financing options for project developers, specifically debt, and specifically for companies, say, that are medium, smaller size farmers, growers, agricultural businesses that would like to develop biochar projects. They really have a significant lack of available finance to them. So what we came up with, and that's what I would like to talk to you about a bit later as well. It's a financing solution that we offer. It's essentially a lease to own, in which we significantly lower the down payment required from these project developers when they want to purchase our machines, and we let them pay it back in carbon removal credits. So this is a good example, I think, of how climate finance can be leveraged to accelerate the market. And we finance this by essentially working with buyers, with corporate buyers that are willing to prepay or at least sign an offtake contract for carbon removal credits. And that's essentially what we do to finance these projects. We also work with Kita, actually, so glad to be here with James as well, who we elected to be our insurer for this model. So that's taking care of some of the project and delivery risk, and we also build a portfolio of projects so that we can manage more and spread the risk across the whole portfolio. If you just compare it to having 1 or 2 projects in the pipeline. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks a lot, and happy to hear your questions.
Great. I'm Will Higbee from Flow Carbon, and just before I start, I want to say thank you so much to the team at IBI and at Kita for putting this on. As some of the previous slides shown, we're all super interested in biochar, but financing, as we come across each and every day, is absolutely a problem in the space. So great to have a webinar where we can talk about it openly and discuss and brainstorm on different ways to approach it. Just a quick bit of background, I joined Flow Carbon around a year ago. Prior to that, I spent a bit over 15 years in investment banking, working in various fields related to project finance and infrastructure finance. Flow Carbon, if you haven't heard of us, is a vertically integrated carbon finance company focusing on 3 primary pillars, one of which is project finance. We also do project development, which is helping projects through the certification and credit issuance process. And finally, sales and trading of carbon credits. As it relates to project financing specifically, which is what we're here to talk about, Flow Carbon advises various types of CDR projects on setting up and raising capital within project financing structures. Just because that's quite broad, I'll narrow it down a bit. We spend day-to-day the vast majority of our time focused on helping biochar suppliers raise project financing debts from private credit lenders, and looking forward to talking about that today.
Fantastic. And Jason Dodier, I'm one of the co-founders of the Grain Ecosystem. I am not surprised the least bit by how fantastic this event has been and the number of people and some of the names I recommend that are already actively involved. Hard to believe it's been a year ago almost since we were at the IBI Field Days in upstate New York, one of the best events that I personally attended internationally, all things biochar. You know, we had folks from Cornell and USDA and American Farmland Trust, and obviously it's great to be back on panels with folks like James and you know, I've got to speak with Flow Carbon on past panels, so it's great to be here. And I think, look, to some of the stuff we saw earlier, and just opening this up, what Hannah said, when you have everybody moving forward together, success takes care of itself, and then you get growth. And I think the beauty of this panel today is really, you know, thinking independently together as a group, and that's why I was, as we were introducing and I was listening, I was looking at all the Q&A, and I hope we can address a lot of that stuff. And at Grain, really, that's our goal. I mean, we've been taking inferences from the past. I personally had a lot of experience internationally working on financing renewable energy programs, setting up access to energy programs, and doing energy as a service. So I got to work on one of the largest public-private partnerships in the US, the microgrid for JFK Terminal 1. And we're taking that expertise, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the discussion, and bringing it to waste to value, waste to energy, biochar, maximizing efficiencies. I also have a lot of relatability with many of the folks on the call, because many of you are thinking about, should I create a biochar business? Should I create another economically viable line of business? And that was the decision we made when we, you know, quit our jobs and started this company and went all in to try to accelerate this very exciting space. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. It's going to be a good one. And hopefully we'll get to most of the questions that you all have today.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your introductions, for the enthusiasm. Let's go ahead and dive in. So the first question that I wanted to open up with is very broad. I think that I'm getting the sense that there's some folks on the call that are very new to the Biochar Project Finance space. So I wanted to just invite each of you or whomever might be interested to kind of just give us like the high level introduction. Like if you were in a one-on-one conversation with someone that's like, oh, what is the Biochar Project Finance space? What does that look like? What would you say? How would you kind of kick us off? Does anybody want to start us off there? What comes top of head?
I'm happy to jump in and go at the start. So what do we mean by project finance. It's a term that gets used a lot, but to maybe explain it in terms of the life cycle of a project developer, project finance is something that you do towards the end. So at the start, when you're initially raising VC dollars, friends and family, you're testing out different strategies, you're trying to work out the right way forwards. That's not project finance. You know, that's equity, that's early stage decisions, working out what works well and what doesn't. Maybe then you move on to operating a pilot facility, various iterations. Some things work, some things don't, but eventually you find a way that works. Then maybe you go to a slightly larger pilot facility and you think, okay, I've got this. I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I know what I'm doing. I found all the pitfalls. I've mitigated the risks. I know what I'm doing. I know what I can do well. I know how I'm going to sell my product. I know the various stakeholders involved in the ecosystem. In fact, I can get them to sign contracts with me. So I have certainty. I know who I'm going to sell my biochar to. I know where I'm going to get my feedstock from. I know I can operate this kit. When you're at that final stage, project financing is there. That's what project financing is. Now, it may seem a high bar and a bit frustrating. You have to go through all the steps first before you can get there. But what I'd say is project finance is worth fighting for. It's typically non-recourse. So that means that the creditors, in particular lenders, equity providers into that project, they only have recourse to that project. So they will only be looking to that as a means of repayment. Now, you know, maybe this now sets a bit of a scene as to why it's a high bar, because they're not looking at you. They're never going to come back after the developer for money. It's really that project. So the bar's necessarily high. But if you can achieve that bar, the funding is typically long dated. It can be very leveraged. So there's minimal dilution and it can be quite cheap. So if we look at evolutions of other renewable sources from like wind and solar, to batteries and EVs, like the aim is to always get to project finance. It takes years, it's not easy, it's hard work, but when you do, you can then rinse and repeat cheap, accessible capital, and that's how we really solve the climate problem. So we also have to get there. We can drill down into specifics, but hopefully it makes sense just from a macro perspective.
And Hannah, to piggyback on that, which is really important, everything that we try to accomplish in this industry, it's all about shifting the odds in the favor of the suppliers and project developers. So you want to put yourself in a position to be successful. And you can study cycles. Like I said, I think the thing we've really worked hard to do is look at fundamental observations from the renewable energy space, seeing these projects, many of them lack technical expertise and tools to fully evaluate project opportunities. So what are the things you can do rather than just rely on performance contracting and understanding the technology there? How do you think through it? How do you leverage digital tools to understand what are the carbon economics for my project? How do I maximize what I've got from a feedstock perspective? How do I ensure I've got the right contract structures? And then ultimately, from an economic perspective, what we've seen is many biochar project developers come to Grain and they say, hey, this is what we've got from a feedstock perspective. We've got some of these offtake agreements in place. And we're thinking about this technology, and we try to help really quickly because and we'll talk more about this later in the discussion. But the technology piece is really, really critical to ensure you're maximizing the economics there and also looking at maximizing the offtake, not just the biochar and the bio-oil, but could you have biogas? Could you have renewable natural gas, et cetera? So it's really art of the possible, making the reversible decisions quick, but the irreversible decisions deliberate. That's at the heart of what we try to do with project developers all over the world to get access to the capital.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you both so much for kicking us off. So thinking about accessing capital, current opportunities, and I imagine that there are many folks on this call that are starting to move toward or are really early in thinking about that financing. What advice do you all have in terms of opportunities currently available? What does the landscape look like right now? And then also, I think with that, how can we help guide folks think about those sort of earlier stages that Will pointed us to before we're ready for financing, really making, I guess, evaluating the greater business model and making some of those decisions and being able to communicate them? That's a two-part question. Yeah, I saw Jan.
I tried to flick my finger. Yes. Let me start at the very beginning, I think, because that's a very interesting question. And I love those answers Jason and Will gave. For us, what we try to do with every potential client or customer that we have, we try to work with them on their business case, right? We need to understand, typically, and Hannah, you talked about it in your presentation as well, there are, and it depends a little bit on technology, but there could be up to 4, say, revenue levers that any biochar projects can pull. One is waste management, so the tipping fees that you mentioned, specifically where, you know, we are taking care of, say, a waste that needs to be treated, cannot just be disposed as is, and their disposal fees. Then you have, for some technologies, the sale of excess renewable energy that can come in a form of heat, steam, or electricity, depending on the project. Again, that can be a significant revenue stream. And then you have what we talked about as well, is the biochar revenue, so from the physical product of biochar, and then also novel financing, a novel revenue stream is the carbon dioxide removal credits. So what we try to do with every one of those project developers is to, you know, have them look at our business case modeling tool. We put all these different numbers in, and then we try to say, does this actually make sense? What is your payback period? You know, what is do you meet your investment hurdles? Will this be bankable, or will you be able to find investors to be actually able to step in and help you lift that project? So that's what we do at the very beginning. Besides all the nitty-gritty technical details, as if like testing the feedstock and things like that. So really try to make sure that we make them ideally find also off-take contracts for one or more of these levers, because the more they can secure these revenue streams from a long-term perspective, the better, the more de-risk, say, the project could be, right? There's still a myriad of things, and I'm sure that Jason and others can talk about it in more detail. There's still a myriad of things that can go wrong during the operation of the project, but at least from the preparatory phase, we try to make sure that we investigate and address as many of the potential pitfalls as possible, so that the projects essentially are, as de-risked as can be in this preparatory phase.
Excellent. Yeah. So as we're thinking, that's a really great transition into thinking about now the challenges, which I know, people on this call are facing. They're probably very familiar with what the challenges are. So I'd love to start talking about some of those challenges, and with that risk, and not to put you on the spot too much, James, but maybe you could kind of speak to us for a moment about the risk from the kind of carbon insurance perspective to lay an introduction there.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I mean, keen to dig into the weeds, particularly for biochar, but just quickly at a macro level, when we're looking at risks, we're looking at what are the project-specific risks, what are the risks for a particular developer, so what are their sort of financials, what's their track record, looking at the kind of the purchasing structure that they might be looking for, the buyer might be looking for insurance against, and we're also looking at the buyer and just trying to understand why they're buying and what kind of due diligence they've done. That's just like very, very broad level. For biochar specifically, when we think about what makes things insurable, there's kind of 4 main dimensions that we kind of need to overlay for biochar. So thinking about kind of feedstock, thinking about the machinery, thinking about sort of fire risk, which classic like insurance angle, and then the sort of market use. So just breaking those down on the feedstock, we're very keen to know exactly what type of feedstock is being used, what track record the developer has with that, how familiar they are with it, how do they store it, what supply chains do they have, are there any redundancies in that supply chain. On the machinery breakdown side, then obviously we want to understand who the manufacturer of the equipment is, but also how was it installed, how was it maintained, what experience does the developer having in doing that. I mean, if you're thinking of renewables as an example, it's very difficult to ensure a poor quality PV cell, and especially if it's had poor installation and maintenance. So that the same thing applies for biochar. Obviously, there's a lot of heat being generated, so there's a classic insurance risk of stuff burning down. So what are the protections in place to prevent and detect fire? What is the co-location of the biochar reactor with? Is it with a sawmill where there's lots of friction and dust in the air, or is it something that's a bit more standalone and de-risked? And then we look at the kind of market use for the credits and for the physical offtake. So thinking about the life cycle assessment for the CDR credits, what potential risks are there that might be impacted by supply chain disruptions or business interruptions, and then also the revenue streams that are coming from the physical offtake. So that's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because from an additionality perspective, multiple revenue streams can make the credits be deemed non-additional, but from a risk perspective, then it's obviously a much lower risk to have multiple revenue streams coming off this project. And for us, because biochar is at such an early stage in the CDR world, at least, the main risks we see are around the counterparty, the kind of the credit risk of the project developer themselves, as well as that sort of technology scale-up risk. Can we en masse get enough reactors into the ground, shovel ready at a sort of continuous industrial level of process quickly enough? And that's sort of more of an implementation risk. So just a few kind of key insurance thoughts there, and hopefully the insurance view helps give some insight for the financiers. So if we can see, if we can assess and price that risk and allow folks to factor that in, then hopefully that unlocks the financing that we need to get going.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting, thinking about that double-edged sword, as you put it, between additionality and the revenue streams. So I heard a lot of different challenges kind of named so far, risk and otherwise. I want to invite, whomever wants to answer this, to maybe speak to, maybe choose one big challenge that you've been seeing from your perspective in your space, and perhaps a proposal, if you have one, to address some of those challenges, or perhaps it's a direction the field is taking to already address them. Does anyone have thoughts there?
I mean, Hannah, I obviously there's a lot to unpack in all of this, and I just want to say I want to reiterate how important carbon insurance is for hedging against the unpredictable risks of climate change and ensuring resilience. I mean, all the events here and discussions I'm having in New York City and other major finance hubs, for investors, that is a critical path item. And James is doing fantastic work to spread the word and raise awareness. And I'm taking down notes as you're talking. I think, look, this is a big one. And a key thing that a lot of people don't realize right now, sustainability-linked loans, which are financial instruments that a lot of us depend on to finance these projects, they've declined. I think I was reading about 30%. So it's still around a couple $100 billion that use of proceeds for these green loans that are out there. And the point is that why I bring that up is the issue, the thing that keeps me up at night, and why I mentioned the sustainability-linked loans piece is, I've talked about this in the past, this tragedy of the commons, or the question comes up, do we have enough capability to scale? We have the waste, do we have the capability of scale, and then be able to execute? And that's really, we're really trying to prioritize execution. I'm really glad Jan's here, because if you think about a technology that's helped shine a light at that around the world, certainly PYREG is right there in the forefront. But how do we do it fast enough, and then bring in non-dilutive infrastructure bank capital? I lived in Dubai for 3 years. Well, we had a loss and damage fund that came out of COP28. Is money getting deployed from that? So what we're really trying to do is raise awareness. So the solution is, there's this big spike in non-institutional demand, particularly from retail investors. So, okay, we're losing it on the SLL side, but we're seeing a retail spike. We're seeing a spike on the offset side, which is why I'm a big fan of the voluntary carbon market, because it de-risks other investors coming in. And if you look at the past 50 years, farmlands typically yielded around 5% annually, with increases of 2 to 4% based on additional regenerative ag practices. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, we see the different types of capital that is getting more aggressive. We're aware of the money that's there in terms of some of the capital maybe that's gone to the sidelines. How do we optimize towards execution? How do we align with some of the OEMs that are out there, both modular and standalone, to double down on infrastructure? But remember, and we could talk about this for a whole session, global events, whether it's what's happening in Ukraine. I talked about the swine flu in China. These disruptions to inputs is a major issue that will hurt us as we look to scale out a bit more. But that's kind of how we're approaching it from a right-sized perspective to execute against tragedy of the commons.
Thank you so much, Jason. Do anyone on the panel want to offer like a general response into, I guess, any of the challenges that have been named so far and potential ways to address them? We've brought up a lot so far. It can go in many directions. Will, I see you coming off mute.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, project finance, lending in particular, it's three things. It's contracts. Like that's what it is. When a developer raises funds at the start, there's nothing actually there. They haven't got any kit. The whole purpose of raising the funds is to buy the kit and set up the project. So how do financial parties, lenders, equity investors get comfortable? Contractual certainty, they're lending against those contracts. So by definition, the easier it is to get contracts, the easier it is to raise project financing. I think we'd all agree raising project financing for biochar projects is it's starting, it's getting there, it's still challenging. Why is that? It's hard to put in contracts. So if we sort of break this down, I really see three different areas. So one, contractual certainty for the products being generated as a result of the process. So we touched on it earlier, as the biochar, the bio oils, maybe power, all this sort of stuff. Challenges in getting fixed price, fixed volume contracts in place for that. So lenders and equity providers can be comfortable that if the project developers perform, they will be remunerated at a fixed rate. That's one. The second side is the feedstock, so the entry sides. If you're co-located, great, you know, you've got your feedstock on tap. Often biochar developers don't. So how do we get comfortable and assurance that there's always going to be that feedstock there? Maybe there's going to be other use cases for that feedstock. Maybe the people giving away the feedstock then want to start charging a price for it, etc. So how do we sort of manage that risk? And the third final one is, how do we know that if a developer's given the money, if they raise the finance, they will construct the project? So in project finance, you would always work with developers who, well, you try to work with developers who've done the same thing before. So that gives you a degree of comfort, but someone could have the best laid business plan in the world, but unforeseen issues can come in. So there's a variety of contractual means to address this, from additional contingent sponsor, you know, cash from sponsors, to construction completion insurance, to full EPC. There's no right or wrong answer in there, but it all comes back down to getting those right contracts in place and giving funders comfort. Now, this is all well said and done. What's the outlook for the future? How do we make this easier? We're actually really bullish on biochar because we think a lot of these things are going to naturally sort themselves out and improve over time. So on the last point, more developers will have tried, will have bought pyrolyzers, will have run their processes, and will have more of a track record behind it. So just by nature of time and more people trying, it's going to get easier to raise financing. Secondly, as I'm sure everyone on this webinar knows, we're all super excited about the use cases of biochar, and there's a myriad of them. Of course, we all know about it being used as a soil amendment, but it's everything else from water filtration to being used in steel process, which excites us. So I think as industry catches up and the research is done and big commercial organizations are willing to put in place these offtake agreements, it's going to get easier to raise financing against that. So look, there's no easy fixes today. I think it's worthwhile for any developer, even if they're maybe not at the project finance stage yet, just to be thinking, who's going to be signing my contracts? Who are the big counterparties, creditworthy counterparties I look to work with in due course? Be focused on that. And I think the good news is, as the word of biochar spreads and the use cases become manifest, more and more people be signing offtake agreements. So it's why we're so excited about the space. And not to speak negatively about other CDR pathways, but I think James talked about it. When you've only got carbon credits as your sole revenue source, you are completely and utterly reliant on having a carbon credit off-taker. And that would be great if there was more people doing it. I wish there were. But you know, one of the great things about biochar is you can get fixed price, fixed volume off-takes. Not easy, but it can be done for the other non-carbon credit products. So we're excited for the future for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So I'm hearing us talk a lot already about kind of anticipated investment trends. I know that folks on the call will want to hear about kind of what, maybe a little bit more, emphasizing a bit more or speaking more directly and clearly about at how you see current investment trends. What can people that are looking for investment today be thinking about in terms of, I guess, the most like popular opportunities or lowest hanging fruit, etc. Anyone have thoughts there besides friends and family?
Hannah, so first of all, you know, we were really proud at the Biochar conference in Sacramento. We got to lead a couple of panel discussions talking about this very question. And because there was such demand and I think a lot of questions that unfortunately we didn't get to address live, we created some blog posts and some videos. But to go at a high level, when you think about the capital stack for these projects, and this is why I keep going back to the cycles in the renewable energy space, you know, we started doing energy as a service, which were a lot of joint ventures between private equity and technology companies. In our case, it was Schneider Electric and the Carlyle Group that formed a venture to finance. I believe these structures, we'll start seeing more and more of them come for sequestration. Right now, you know, to Will's point, when you think about what's available, you've got certainly non-dilutive capital, You've got grant money, philanthropic money, bank loans, bank debt, junior debt, pre-purchase of credits and equity, and it varies in terms of the expectation. So right now, obviously, the economics, the average bank loans are slightly above 10% due to increased rates that we've seen. There's other expectations when it comes to venture or growth equity. And that's why the mindset for us is trying to think about trying to figure out how much capital needs to be raised for the project. The quicker we can get there, the better. Stress testing, again, the different sources of potential revenue streams, again, as Will was alluding to, that's really, really critical. And then trying to optimize. If it's a first project, for example, if it's not a pre-existing business that has strong cash flows that might have collateral, you might be looking to give up more equity in response of doing that project. In the US right now, there's a lot of excitement around USDA-backed loans and being able to maximize USDA-backed loans wherever possible. Certainly, 336-808 reimbursement for the biochar is really nice. But again, it's the mindset of how do you ring fence those cash flows, because investors want de-risked investment opportunities. But that is our goal. It's always how do we maximize, depending on what country or what state the project is in, how do you maximize that non-dilutive capital? Because there is a lot of non-dilutive capital that is out there if you're looking for it the right way. And then matching grants are really, really great. And then looking at the other layers. The last thing I'll say, which has emerged a lot, is the angel networks. We're seeing more and more angel investors, whether they're part of family offices or they have a mandate around impact investing. They just are looking for custodians and groups where they can allocate capital to know what's actually happening. So if they're going to invest in a project like we're working on today in Kenya or Tanzania or in Southeast Asia, they want to know that the level of integrity and transparency and permanence and all those things are there. That's really important. But for us, it's just, we got to make sure that these tools are available and the access points are there, regardless of where the investors are coming from and regardless of where the project is.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Jason. And I think that transitions, or, for me, it brings up a bit, Jan, what you were talking about earlier. I know that you are really interested and enthusiastic about being able to kind of connect financial modeling with smaller scale producers. I just want to invite you, if you'd like to share a few thoughts about kind of how you're thinking about that lately. I know you didn't give the finger. I'm putting you right on the spot.
That's perfectly fine. I mean, it's hard to come after Jason because he has been quite comprehensive. But what we saw as one of the ways to do this, right? Because we are not financiers, we are not project developers. We just try to make sure that we can do something for our clients to help them get these projects off the ground. And it will always be a mix of different types of finance. And that's what Jason and Will have already been outlining. What we try to do is to figure out if there is a way to leverage the voluntary carbon markets today. Somebody called them recently pre-compliance markets. I really like that term. So I hope that it will eventually become a compliance market, and then that of course changes the game completely. If you have carbon removal as part of something like the EU emission trading system or the UK emission trading system, it will tremendously help, I think, the bankability of these projects. But back to the topic. So what we try to do is essentially find long-term offtake contracts for biochar carbon removal. Ideally prepaid, but if not, then at least an offtake contract. And then we offer a lease-to-own scheme to project developers, in which they could pay as little as 20% of the original asking price for our machines. And essentially, they pay us back not in cash, but they pay us back in biochar carbon removal credits. What we also do, and that's to address some of the risk points, is that we bring in Kita to help and ensure these projects. And we also work with the certification bodies and with digital monitoring, reporting, verification providers to make sure that this whole process as transparent as possible. Because what I also see on the market is lots of people are trying to produce biochar, and as this gaining a lot of visibility, a lot of attractiveness, we will see all kinds of producers entering the market. We need to safeguard quality of the projects, of the biochar itself, of the biochar carbon removal, because it will be critical not to lose the credibility biochar currently is gaining, I think, within the market. It's been a long battle, right, to kind of win, say, some of the marketing value back against some of the other carbon removal solutions. And that's what we need to not lose. So I would really focus also on that end. So besides, talking about finance and all that, we also need to make sure that these projects are high quality, they are very transparent. We can demonstrate that the biochar is of high quality and that it will stay inert under the ground and actually realize what we're all trying to do here, right? And that's carbon removal, and not just to play some kind of game with selling credits that actually do not mean anything on the ground. Yeah.
So many great points. Thank you all so much. We have about 5 more minutes, so we're going to try to dig in to as much as we can in this next 5 minutes. I know I still have so many questions. I'm seeing you all in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. There's a question that keeps coming up, and I'm curious if you all have a number or could point folks in some direction to orient around. And it is, what is a typical or a currently expected return, roughly, on investment in a biochar production from investors, right, in a biochar production business? What can people be thinking? Is there like, a general expected rate of return on investment?
I'm happy to jump in here and try and kick it off. So I'll give 2 responses to this. The first one, I'll answer the question directly. If you're lucky enough to be at a position and you've got all the contractual certainty required by a debt provider, and normally when we talk about project finance, we're talking about debt. That's the reason why you do it. Try and get as much debt as possible in the structure. If you tick all the boxes that need ticking, and there's certainly a lot of them, it'll be over 10%, but hopefully not much. So it's somewhere between 10 and 12 from commercial rate lenders. That's not to say there's state-backed lending programs where financiers may give you tighter pricing, but there's other implications there, amount of leverage you can get, time it takes to get these deals off the ground, biochar's quite neat for that, et cetera, et cetera. So a bit over 10%. Now, the second bit of the answer, I think, is equally as important, and I've said this to all the clients that we have. It's so much more than just the interest rate. Interest rate is important. I think people compare and contrast interest rates just because it's easy, so that they think it encapsulates all of the cost of debt. But actually, when you come to analyze the impact of debt on shareholder returns, which is ultimately why it's being done, is so much more the interest rate. It's the tenor of the debt. It's how quickly it amortizes down. It's other requirements of that debt, be it covenant packages, be it reserve accounts you need to set up. So really, it's more than just looking at the price of the debt. It's actually working with someone to model all the aspects of the debt against your particular projects, and then looking at the impact on returns. So I would say let's not get too fixated on price of debt. If you want an answer to it, I'd say a bit above 10%, but really it's about understanding who the right funder is for your projects. And that'll be more than just the interest rate being charged.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for reiterating that 10% and helping the group to think about it from a wider angle. So we do have more questions, but I want to kind of turn it over to the panelists. What questions do you have for each other? I mean, you've each brought up so many great points. We, of course, could do a masterclass in this. But what's kind of at top of mind? Is anyone burning to ask a question or put something out there for the audience?
Yeah. I've got one just on, I mean, one of the key things in project finance is taking security, but in biochar, you've got the physical offtakes, you've got the sort of the plant and machinery, you've got potentially the credits, and I haven't yet seen like a kind of firm route or like consistent approach to how that can be approached by the banks. Be curious if you're seeing anything, or do you expect kind of structures to evolve in that space, and then hopefully that makes it easier for the banks to de-risk their lending and pump more money into the space.
Sorry, James, the question is, how is a security package put together for a lender on a transaction like this? Yeah,
particularly for biochar, and how do you attach it to the different sort of elements that are there?
Yeah, I think actually if you compare and contrast maybe versus other CDR pathways, particularly nature-based, is actually comparatively easier. You've got finite dimensions of the project, you've got a hard asset underlying, you've got something that can be sold secondhand if it doesn't work out well. Like it's actually, nothing's ever straightforward in this space, let's be clear, but I think it's much easier than other CDR pathways I've seen to put together a security package, which is not too dissimilar to maybe from what a funder would have seen if they're doing a solar and a wind transaction. If you consider that comparable, it always comes down to the same bunch of things. So it's the actual hard asset itself, the metal, the cables, the actual item that you've got. It's permit, rights of ownership over the land. Is that land owned by the developer or is it leasehold? What's their right to operate on the land? And then a general all asset pledge would also be encompassing of any products being generated at the end. So fundamentally that's owned by, or the lender's got access to it, if the obligations aren't paid back. So really breaks down to hard asset, underlying land on which you operate, and products being made at the end. I think when you put that all together, you can draw comparables to a wind and solar transaction. It's not easy, but you can say, look, lender, if this was a wind transaction, here's how it would look. I think with other pathways, unfortunately, you can't even draw those comparables, and it's much harder. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Will. What other thoughts do we have?
A lot of this stuff has been said. I would make one really important point that's applicable to everybody. I got this from a mentor that was leading a large commercial organization across Africa and Middle East when I lived there. Be fanatical about starting smart. I mean, I think early stage activities such as defining the outcomes and assembling a right team and creating your realistic project plan and doing the right economic models is really critical to ensuring you're in a good position to be successful. I mean, to what Will just said, I mean, nature-based projects require, certainly different infrastructure upgrades or infrastructure solutions to protect or regenerate ecosystems. So the investment sizes vary, but it's not like a digital venture. A digital venture is going to require substantial, return structures. Investors are, that we talk to, they're focused on multiple revenue streams, scientific credibility, geo-specific approaches is important. We didn't get to touch on that, but that's one that I'm particularly really passionate about. Strategic partnerships and teams, and then again the experience in managing or having done some kind of infrastructure work in the past, even if it's not relatable to biochar, because there's just as we've heard today. And Jan was alluding to this, so much similarities in executing the project types, especially when you've got an output that is going into offtakes, type of water filtration or energy production. So that's what I would add to Will's point.
That's great. Okay, thank you so much. So we have 1 more minute of this discussion. So I just want to invite you all to share kind of any parting words for the audience here, and to the audience members. I'm sorry we couldn't get to every question, but this webinar is recorded and we'll make it available. So hopefully you can rewatch it. I bet some of your answers are embedded in some of these responses so far. So I hand it over to each of you to say some parting words before I close out.
I can kick off just to say that I think biochar is readily insurable. It's very high on the technology readiness level. The key thing is just for us to understand there's like four key themes of risk that we think that are specific to biochar. The feedstock, the machinery, the fire risk, and the market risk, and engage early with the insurance industry, because we can help assess, give our view on what some of those risks are, how we can help to lower them, and also help to, if you can lower the risk, then you can lower your lender requirements or insurance requirements at a lower price. So early engagement would be key.
Yeah, throwing a parting shot on my side. I think I noticed one of the comments in the group was there's not many finance providers on this call. I think that's right. And just to touch on that, look, it is a early space. It's an evolving space. We certainly wish there was more project finance providers active in the space. But what I will say is we have a lot of conversations with finance providers who are looking at it actively, are keen to get in it, see the parallels and symmetry versus what they've done so far, and are keen to explore. So it may seem hard today, and it is hard today, but I think we're all on this webinar because we think it's going to grow and we think it's going to work. So every day that goes by, more developers will have operated more projects. There'll be more stakeholders in the ecosystem involved, particularly on the offtake side. More of these great use cases of biochar will end up getting proven out with large commerce and industry putting in place long-term contracts. We've seen it before in the renewable space across wind and solar. Like we absolutely get there, and we all believe in it. So just keep going is what I'd say. And if anyone thinks they've got a project which is nearing the stage of project finance, every project's completely different. We would love to hear from you and love to talk through those particular details and nuances of your projects.
Yeah, and Hannah, coming on that, just one really important point. We didn't touch on this that much. Carbon reductions can only be applied when retired. So you hear a lot about corks and issuances. You know, a pre-cork is a future commitment. If it never delivers a cork or a carbon dioxide removal certificate or whatever your credit is, it should never be accounted by the purchaser against current emissions. So obligations are the result of the commercial terms included in any contracts for failure to deliver. So I just want to make that point because I really want to make sure some of the audience comes away understanding that piece, and we can dig into it. And I'll just close and say, look, we've been really, really lucky. We've gotten to work with hundreds of biochar project developers all over the world at different stages in their life cycle. You know, we're trying to bring elements of digitization, decarbonization, decentralization, and we're using, you know, the learnings from those discussions and from the energy market in general, particularly the renewable market, to empower folks and all over the world to navigate the complex and uncertain energy landscape. And we've got to just keep moving forward. There's going to be a lot of doldrums, really tough times, and that's why what IBI is doing, and I can't wait for whenever the next event is to meet a lot of the people that are here chatting and putting incredible questions, to talk about it live and debate about it live when we're all next together. So thank you again for doing this. This was awesome.
Excellent. And Jan, hand it over to you for your parting words as well.
I love that you pulled up this slide that you have there right now, because that was actually my closing point. I think, and Bill alluded to it a couple of times, biochar is an amazing product, right? It's not just about carbon removal. That's the key difference to some of the other pathways. What I think is we need to create a more demand for the biochar as a product itself as well. It starts with this. It starts with education. It starts with going to the people that will be using the biochar to, you know, increase the plant productivity, make the topsoil healthier again, restore soils, all these kind of great things that biochar can help with. So spread the word, you know, educate yourself and others, I would say, on biochar, and let's just scale the market that way as well. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure. I will have a read on my own through all the questions, because I've seen there have been a lot of good ones, and get in touch if you're interested to learn more about PYREG or our financing solution, of course.
Excellent. And I think that goes for all of the panelists. If you'd like to learn more about their companies, the work that they're doing, please reach out to each of their companies. Thank you all so much for being on this call. James, Jan, Jason, Will, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your insights today. For those that want to learn more, you can go to biochar-international.org. We have a plethora of resources available, open to everyone. We also have a members-only portal with more exclusive resources as well for members with IBI. We are always releasing new education offerings, including the Biochar study tour in Italy this October. We hope to see you all there. It sounds like we're going to see at least some of our panelists there. This is going to be a really great event, y'all. We're going to look at biochar production, application techniques, the use of drones in application and in kind of field research, and get hands-on with some researchers looking at biochar and soil science, all with the backdrop of vineyards in the Chianti Shire in Tuscany, Italy. The program includes lodging, meals, plenty of wine for everyone. It's going to be great. I really hope to meet you all there. Lauren will pop a link into the chat for registration, and as well some links to subscribe to our newsletter so you can make sure to catch webinars like this one in the future. And I thank you all again. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, evening, wherever you might be in the world.
So much.
Let's keep going.
Let's do it. Bye. Thank you.